Hello, bonjour. My name is Melanie Desjardins, and I'm thrilled to be part of the virtual 2021 GeoIgnite Summit to tell you a little bit about the Canadian Council on Geomatics. The Canadian Council on Geomatics, or the CCOG as I'll refer to it moving forward, was established to provide leadership, innovation, and coordination for the Canadian geospatial sector. How we do this is by providing coordination and collaboration in the development of foundational and authoritative datasets in Canada for the benefit of Canadians and for Canada's social, economic, and environmental well-being. The CCOG is an FPT body that was established in 1972. The first Geomatics Accord came to light in 2001, and it's a cornerstone document that is there to set a framework for intergovernmental collaboration on geomatics. The intent of the first Geomatics Accord was to basically increase efficiencies and collaboration across governments and in face of the rapid changing technology. It also sets out the roles and responsibilities for the members of the Canadian Council on Geomatics and sets out the main priorities for the Canadian Council on Geomatics. The most recent Geomatics Accord looks to continue some of the work that was established in the very first one back in 2001. It's still looking at creating those efficiencies, looking at defining those roles and responsibilities, but monitoring and responding to those social and environmental drivers that we're facing today in the sector, looking at continuing the government efficiency as a whole, and reducing social and environmental costs through the use of geospatial products and data. As a government council, representatives of the CCOG are made up of senior officials representing geomatics interests across provinces, territories, and the federal government. Each representative jurisdiction has one vote when it comes to deciding on initiatives moving forward, and the federal family is also represented by one vote, which is made by Natural Resources Canada. The work that we do at the Council is done primarily through the coordination of the provincial territorial chair that rotates every year, and the federal co-chair represented by Natural Resources Canada. We establish our work plans annually, just like most other organizations. We do this around the timing of our annual general meeting. The working groups that we have really help set some of the priorities for work in some of the activities that they are doing. We may also establish priorities depending on sub-working groups or funded activities that can take place due to emerging issues that are going on in the sector. Basically, we have the year or so to enact on those activities. Members from the provinces and territories provide financial contribution or in-kind contribution for the sustainment of the council, and Natural Resources Canada provides in-kind contribution of the Secretariat, which is our administrative function that we rely so heavily on for our day-to-day activities. A lot of the work done at the CCOG is accomplished through many of our working groups. Some of them you may recognize, like the GeoBase working group, which is there and has been there for a long time, developing and sustaining authoritative data sets on various geospatial themes in Canada. We have the Canadian Geodetic Reference System Committee, which looks at revising and maintaining geodetic reference systems in Canada. We have the Cadastral Working Group, and it's there to represent the Surveyor General folks across the country and their interest in the cadastral fabric. And lastly, our Governance Working Group advises on all matters related to governance, including a lot of our long-standing documents like the Geomatics Accord, like our term of reference, like establishing our strategic vision, mission, and direction and work planning. Some of the work that we do at the CCOG doesn't always fall within our existing working groups, so at times we have to develop a temporary one so that we can concentrate some energy and some effort around dealing with an emerging topic or issue. A good example of that is our activities around Next Generation 911 and understanding where there may be an interest for the provincial and territorial representatives, where Next Generation 911 might source back to some of the authoritative data sets that they provide. We also have some temporary working groups like the second example that no longer exists, but where we were trying to establish some efficiency around acquisition and storage and maintenance of Earth observation products. So once the issues are resolved or we decide to move on for whatever reason, we can stand down those working groups as needed. The CCOG, although it's been around for 50 years, and although it was initially quite data-driven in that it was a lot to do with creating those national data sets and using provincial and territorial contributions towards it, there was still that core focus around collaboration and reducing duplication of efforts and so on. It's not that we have evolved and that we're not trying to do those things anymore. That is still very much a focus of what we're trying to do. But now more so we're looking at focusing on open data and government, which wasn't a concept that was as prominent back in 1972. Standards and interoperability, what are those, and endorsing, looking at endorsing those and keeping data at the source. Those are the things that we are focusing on more and more now. We want to continue to enhance collaboration. This is not something that will ever go away. We'll always have to break down silos and try to leverage each other's expertise and where we can leverage each other's investments to work more closely together. And emerging technology is something that we'll always be faced with. So no matter how we evolve over time as a council, the emerging technology piece is something that we're always going to have to contend with, and there's always going to be work for us to do in how we are going to leverage those technologies and work together to try to make use of those tools as they become available. The topics that we are interested in at the CCOG can be varied, and they change over time, depending, of course, on what the emerging issues are. Sometimes it's identifying a gap where there's a void in a current data set, whether it's in response to an emergency situation where we realize, would be better if we had that data. So sometimes those are the drivers around some of the topics that we explore at the CCOG. Some of those current topics include the development of a national building footprint data set and working and advising Natural Resources Canada as they're developing this and developing a data model. We're using resources from the provinces and territories to help evaluate those data models and those guidelines, and so that's an example there of a current topic. Also looking at developing some standards on national addressing, which is very important, as you can imagine, with Next Generation 911, but also for a variety of other purposes around elections and census and so on. The tools and the new capabilities that are brought about through AI and machine learning is something that we're very interested in, and in a way that how can we leverage that to bring something that was maybe hard to achieve or hard to obtain at a provincial or territorial level or even at a federal level can now be done fairly well with AI and machine learning, and so looking at how we can bring those tools, lower the barrier to entry to using some of those tools and making them accessible to people, and testing them and creating basically test beds around some of these new tools. We're always interested in Earth observation, different EO strategies happening either nationally or internationally, and how can we better respond to the need for Earth observation products, Earth observation data storage, Earth observation data manipulation and analysis. These are all common points of interest across provinces and territories and across the federal government, and we are working always working towards trying to find new solutions for these. And lastly, data findability and discoverability. This is not only our interest, but it's something that is very much of interest to Natural Resources Canada, and we're always looking to work together with our federal partners to find new tools or to test new tools on data discoverability and making data more accessible to Canadians. We still see the Canadian Council on Geomatics being relevant after 50 years of existence. The pace at which technology is evolving and is hard to wrap your head around, and there is still a need for some leadership there on the development of geospatial products that are derived through new tools and visualized in new ways. Coming together as a council and developing best practices and standards around these things is something that we continue to see our involvement in. The barrier to entry on geomatics as a whole, whether it's developing or accessing geomatics tools, has changed. It's been lowered, and many more people can access it today, whereas maybe 50 years ago it wasn't the same story. There were pockets of experts developing this stuff, and very few people had an understanding of how these products were derived and how they may even try to tackle that on their own. So with that lower barrier to entry, we recognize that the authoritative source isn't necessarily going to sit at NRCan, or it's not going to sit, in one federal department moving forward. It's going to be distributed as those pockets of expertise are now cropping up across provinces and territories and municipalities and so on. So with the Canadian Council on Geomatics, we still see ourselves as having a role to play in the development of best practices and standards to help inform those who are collecting and disseminating geospatial information. Something else that isn't going to change that we foresee in the near future are need for responding to some of these emerging issues, whether they be fire, floods, pandemics, and so on. There is always going to be a need for some coordination and collaboration around the development of information products, geospatial information products for decision makers. And so there is going to be a role to play there for the CCOG as well. We see the future of the CCOG being much like the past, in that we're going to continue to work towards some of the common initiatives that we've identified, including collaboration, coordination, data interoperability, data findability, best practices, development of standards, leveraging common investments. These are all things that we're going to continue to work towards. One of the things that we are interested in doing that we haven't necessarily done in the past is having Indigenous inclusion within the Canadian Council on Geomatics and addressing some of the needs around Indigenous communities and geospatial information and access to geospatial information in Canada. So this is going to be one of the new priorities that we're going to be focusing on in the future. But overall, we see ourselves continuing to seek, the development of these authoritative data sets where there are gaps, or connecting people to the authoritative source where they exist. And we want to continue to work towards that timely response to authoritative information for those decision makers. I'd like to thank you all for listening through this presentation and taking your time to learn a little bit about what the Canadian Council on Geomatics is and what we stand for, what we're working towards. I hope you found this informative. We realize that perhaps communication is something that we need to work at improving and helping raise awareness about our activities, and this is partly why we're here today, to help with that effort. We also have been working on improving our website and developing more resources around our working groups and some of the activities that we've been working on. And so we'll be launching some updates to our website in the next month. And we look forward to getting more visitors and pointing you to resources that you may find interesting in the Canadian geospatial sector. Thank you again for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Melanie.
Hello.
Hi, and welcome to a fellow COGS grad. Melanie and I have the distinction of graduating from the same graduate program around the same time, as well as being a part of the Applied Geomatics Research Group there. So yeah, just want to point that out. It's kind of a fun piece of trivia. Thank you for your presentation. I in the past have liked to call Ccog the Canada's Geospatial Illuminati, because we knew they were important, but we didn't know what they were doing. So it's
well, hopefully I've clarified some of that today. And
yeah.
Yeah, we don't wear any special rings or anything like that. We're at least no one's told me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've it's great to see a step forward into sharing some information. Great to hear there's going to be some updates to your website. So yeah, for the participants in the audience, this is a great chance to engage with Melanie on Ccog issues, kind of pan-Canadian issues across jurisdictions relating to geomatics. So please use the Q&A tool. I see we've already got some questions, so I'm going to turn to them. The first one is from Vivian. Can Melanie please elaborate further on Earth observation collaborative strategies? Thank you.
Sure. So on Earth observation, this is it can be a difficult piece for a lot of jurisdictions across Canada, and also for the federal government when it comes to needing up-to-date information at the right, temporal coverage, resolution, multispectral, what have you, and so finding ways to access that data when you need it and do it at a relatively affordable cost can be a challenge at times, and especially around when we are responding or looking to respond to emergency situations like, well, recall the fires in Fort McMurray a few years back, looking for access to resources on Earth observation information. What does Alberta have? What would, Southern NWT have to cover and kind of see what's going on with the fire, which way is the wind blowing, where are things moving to. So some of those, there's obviously a need there around Earth observation data. And what's obvious is that not every jurisdiction across Canada has the same resources at their disposal to make those types of acquisitions. And so as a council, we look at what are some potential ways that we can work with our partners in the federal government to kind of lower that barrier to access for some Earth observation products, especially in those times where there are emergency situations. And so that's where things like our Geomatics Accord comes into play, where we may be able to share information with the Department of National Defense in the event that they need access to our data for a quick response. Then we can make that information available, even though they may not be listed as a in our case, a territorial representative, we can make that information available to them and kind of increase that response. But we're always looking for better ways of making that information sharing more fluid, and also trying to find better ways to increase our access, whether that be national strategies for pots of funding or national strategies for data exchange, things of that sort.
Great, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to close that question. There's another question from the participants, from Judith. Is there an initiative in the air about having an authoritative source for positioning underground services? It's very specific.
To date, I have not heard about this at the council table, but it's definitely something I think that is of interest to me as a representative for the Northwest Territories, and I think also of interest to a lot of other people. There was a really great presentation a few years ago at the SDI Summit, for some of you who may have attended that, where a presenter from the US had a really great information on how they do this and why that investment is so important, because, you know, knowing where you dig, or, you know, where you're going to go build something or whatever is so important for underground resources. We definitely recognize that that is a gap, but at this stage so far it hasn't really come up as a priority item, but it's a good one to keep in mind.
Yeah, we've got an entire underground infrastructure mapping forum in the workshop week on the 29th and 30th. That is very exciting. That's being led by Jeff Zeiss. So anyone who's interested in kind of underground mapping, that's definitely going to be something you're going to want to check out. Another question from the participants, I'm going to mark it. So it's from John. Does Ccog engage in presentations and discussions with the private sector? Is there a forum to present new ideas?
That's an interesting one. We, as a general practice, we have not typically invited private sector to our monthly meetings that we have, for instance, mostly because we're always dealing with kind of an emerging issue that is either happening, you know, within the federal departments, or one of the objectives that we've set out for ourselves as part of our work plan for the year. So it's not, I would say it's not that frequent that we have that engagement from the private side. And because we are provincial, territorial reps and federal reps, we also, you know, we want to make sure that we're, you know, we're being fair in how we leverage and work with our private industry partners. And so I would say that it's not that we've closed the door on that, but we certainly, it's not a common practice. I think that there are other forums like GeoIgnite today where we can definitely see what's available from private sector, and that's why we're here and we're supporting this event today, because we definitely want to encourage private sector. But I would say our engagement at the private sector level is more from maybe a jurisdiction by jurisdiction perspective, where, say, one province or territory may have worked with a private industry to develop some sort of a tool to resolve some sort of an issue that was going on, and then that was presented at the council table. That would be one of the ways that we've engaged with private sector.
Great, thank you. There's another question from Judith. Judith is asking about if there are best practices documentation available. Is that something Ccog does?
That's a really great question. So a lot of our a lot of the standards and best practices, I guess, that come out of the Canadian Council on Geomatics they're usually done in collaboration with our federal partners. So a lot of that documentation sits on the federal open docs, or open, sorry, I should know this off the top of my head, but the open documentation tool that the federal government offers, and that is where most of the documentation ends up. However, it's a good question, because we recognize that findability is something, you know, we're definitely concerning ourselves with, wanting to make sure that those who come to us and say, okay, well, what are those standards, what are those best practices that this Canadian Council on Geomatics endorses, and we want to make sure that that is easily detectable by people. So our updates to our website are exactly for that purpose, so that we can take more control on populating those standards and practices. So I would say as of yet, we haven't started doing that work because our website updates are just kind of coming to completion. But please visit our website, and we'll be populating those standards in the near future.
Great. There's another question from the audience. They're right because we're all at our computers, I guess, right? So they went right to the website for Ccog. I'm on your website, and I note that your accord is in effect between 2014 and the end of 2019.
Yes, yeah. So another reason why why we were renewing our website is because our ability to update our website was limited in the forum that it sat in. It was sitting within the federal infrastructure, and so we're moving away from that to better enable our ability to make those updates. So we do have an updated accord that takes us to 2025, and we will be making that public.
There's a joke in there about going cordless somewhere, but I can't find it. Another question from Vivian. Can Melanie please elaborate on the Building Footprints Initiative?
Yeah, I can definitely try to do it justice. So this Building Footprint Initiative was something that was definitely recognized as a need across Canada. And so NRCan did a lot of the work. They, I believe, worked through a contractor to help them develop a data model. And we worked across the provinces and territories to help advise on what are some of those aspects, those attributes, those pieces of information that we think would be really important for a building footprint data model for all sorts of things, for emergency response, obviously, in response to floods, understanding different things around, even looking at building heights eventually. I'm not sure that one in particular made it into the current data model. And there's also an interest from Statistics Canada in adopting some sort of a data model around building footprints as well, so that they can integrate their information along with that and help better decision making, basically. So so that data model is, I think it's coming close to a point where we had an accepted data model as of last Christmas, I believe, and I can't speak to what the next steps are in that stage, but we are continuing to work with NRCan on getting that data model out.
Great. We've got time for a few more questions, folks, so get them into the Q&A. Yeah, there's more coming in. There's one here from one of the audience members. They're not identifying themselves. If I were a graduate student looking for work, are there ways I can get involved with Ccog?
So yeah, there's a couple different ways to I guess to collaborate or work with this Canadian Council on Geomatics. If somebody has working either at a municipal level or at another level, and there's something that they want to share, the people to connect with would be well, you can reach out to us directly through the Canadian Council on Geomatics website and through our secretariat, with which we will be updating the information, make sure that is available to everyone. But we can work with the jurisdictional representatives for each province and territory. So for instance, here in the Northwest Territories, the municipalities don't have that forum, but if there was an interest from a municipality to share something that they had been working on, or a researcher who's been doing some work and wants to share that, they could work through the Geomatics team within the province or territory, which is I guess the senior representatives that make up the council are from those teams, and that would be one way. Also working through representatives through different federal departments as well, and bringing forward an idea or concept of something that that they'd want to share. Now, it's not to say that we can necessarily entertain every presentation and every idea out there. We look at it certainly from a lens of how will this benefit all Canadians? How might this be applicable across Canada? And deal with things around openness, open data, making data findable, and accessible and things of that sort. So those are definitely some of the priorities. And then, there are some test beds out there again on how do we implement AI, how do we implement machine learning on different things. That again is of interest to us. So that those are the types of things that we might pay attention to and invite presentations on those topics. I hope I answered that question.
I think so. I think it was in there. Okay, I think we've got a last question as we're now moving into the break. From Natalie, can we contact you to get advice and guidance on developing best practices documents for managing geospatial information?
We could certainly help point you in the right direction. If you're looking for something that may already exist, we can certainly help in that respect. We work a lot, like I said, with our federal partners who have done a lot of this work. So you might have heard of like the national standards on LiDAR acquisition, the national standards on flood mapping, national standards on like I said, on data models for building footprints or data models for addressing. So we would definitely point back to some of those resources. And if there isn't one that exists, then that might be something that we might want to invest a little bit of energy moving forward and provide some idea of where we might want to take future activities.
Thank you. So to close out, before we go to the break, there's a very interesting panel tomorrow that you're participating on. Can you give us a little bit of preview? Who's on that panel and what's it about?
Yeah, sure. So this panel is a panel of the different provincial and territorial representatives to talk about sort of the priorities that are going on across some of these jurisdictions. The panel will be moderated by Trevor Taylor from the Open Geospatial Consortium, who I'm really familiar with through our work at the SDI Summit. And we also have James Britton from the Ontario government, as well as Colin McDonald from the Nova Scotia government, and myself from the government of the Northwest Territories. And we'll all be sharing a little bit, and it's kind of a nice kind of cross section. We're hoping to get somebody a little bit further west coast, but we weren't successful in doing that. So we'll get a fairly good cross section of what's going on across provinces and territories tomorrow. Melanie,
thank you so much. We at GeoIgnite, we appreciate the support. Thank you for sharing with us. Great talk. I think it was really important.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on a great event so far.
Thank you very much.